I am more excited about this game than any other game the Texans have played so far. And the reason is this. I think both of these teams, both of these fan bases, and both of these quarterbacks have reason to kind of stand up and say, I told you so. I think that the Bengals, for a couple years, went through a dark period, and then all of a sudden, they found their quarterback and things changed, and they've changed dramatically for the Bengals. I think the Texans are right there in that same spot. And let's remember, this is the battle of two quarterbacks who can't possibly be good in the NFL. There's no way in hell they can be good in the NFL because they're both Ohio State quarterbacks. And I was led to believe that anybody whoever sniffed a Buckeye would never ever be a good quarterback in the NFL. And yet it looks like one is well on his way, and one for sure is in Joe Burrow. So when we go over the matchup between these two teams, we're going to talk about the quarterbacks. Obviously, we got to talk about the injury situations because the Texans have like a Civil War battlefield full of injuries out there. The Bengals have some very, very important and key injuries, obviously, especially in the receiver position. So that's a potential little bit of salve on some of the injuries the Texans have sustained on defense. And then some of the more player-by-player matchups. And also, look, the Texans' run game versus the Bengals' run defense. I think that the stats don't quite tell the whole picture there on either side. But if we're going to start out with some of the misconceptions, I think, about both these quarterbacks, and we'll start with Joe Burrow. Since he's gotten over his calf injury, remember the first few games of the year, really right up until that Cardinals game or so, the calf was really bothering him. And these last 4 games, they've been on a tear. Joe Burrow, especially these last couple games, looks just like his old self, looks completely healthy. He's threading the ball through tiny, narrow windows. He's spreading the ball around to different receivers. Again, Jamar Chase is banged up. Tee Higgins is out this week. But last week, he used all 3 of their tight ends effectively. So all of those things, he's in full force. So if you look at, like, right now, the Bengals are the 23rd ranked scoring offense in the NFL. That is fool's gold right there if you get excited about any of that. They are firing on all cylinders. Throw out some of the stats. Throw out all of his other stats. Like Joe Burrow, the Bengals offense, they're as good as they have been. And the only big thing that might be slowing them down this week is injuries from the wide receivers. This is the one that caught my eye. Joe Burrow is 5-1 against Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. Some of the Bengals fans pointed out to me that quarterbacks who haven't yet played the Bengals, and then when they play in Cincinnati, seemingly have had a pretty good run. Might be one of those situations where, like, those quarterbacks don't even know what they don't know, and they don't fall for some of Lou Anarumo, the defensive coordinator's ruses, because he's really good at ruses and disguises, rotating coverages and all of that. Maybe they just go in kind of blindly and stupidly and play well. I think there's going to be much more of a chess match between Anarumo and CJ Stroud. Defenses really, since the Falcons game, have been throwing a lot at CJ Stroud, and he's responded. He's learned a few things. He's starting to use that shoulder shimmy a little bit more, starting to buy time. The other thing is about Burrow, and it's hard to talk about Burrow without directly going to CJ Stroud, not just because of the Ohio State thing, but because I think, Colin Cowherd won't stop talking about how the comp for CJ Stroud was Jared Goff. Like, every time he mentions CJ Stroud, he says the comp was Jared Goff. I think right now, honestly, in a lot of ways, the comp has become much more Joe Burrow. When you talk about touch and accuracy, Joe Burrow especially has been good under pressure. CJ's been very good against the blitz, not as good under pressure. There's a little bit more nuance to those stats too, and we'll discuss that when we get to CJ officially, since I can't stop talking about CJ. But if you think about Joe Burrow, cold-blooded, incredible under pressure. The Texans do have one of the best pressure rates in the NFL. If you look at ESPN pass rush win rates, they're very, very good in that regard. Jonathan Grenard has started to pile on the sacks as well as get pressures. He's getting double-teamed a lot, but he's still getting to the quarterback. Will Anderson is the one that I know we've had multiple discussions about whether, like, what is the value of a sack anyway compared to a pressure? Will Anderson's getting very close to the quarterback, getting a lot of pressures. The big problem defensively for the pass rush right now is that there's just easy yardage behind that defensive line. So quarterbacks are getting rid of the ball quickly. I don't think Joe Burrow is going to be any different in that regard, especially with Jimmy Ward out. So defensive line has to keep coming. They got to get pressure in Joe Burrow's face. The challenge is that Joe Burrow is very, very good at getting rid of the ball accurately under pressure. One quote from Burrow regarding Jamar Chase being injured, Tee Higgins being completely out, and Joe Burrow only having 90% of his fingernails. Lost a fingernail last week. Under discussed. It's not under discussed. He's fine. But he said, I knew that I liked the matchup with him today in one-on-one situations. We were able to get some, talking about Jamar Chase. When they were playing man, they were shading the safety over to Jamar Chase. So T had to step up, and he did. So Tee Higgins was playing very well, and that's not going to be who steps up. This time it would be Tyler Boyd or whomever else if they step up as Jamar Chase is getting double teamed or bracketed. We'll see. That's where like Jamar Chase's injury with Tee Higgins being out is going to hurt the Bengals. That certainly doesn't mean that the Bengals can't produce. They're just going to have to do it differently. So it balances things out a little bit. You can talk all you want about, hey, if Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase pull attention away from guys like Tyler Boyd. Joe's shown that he's perfectly capable of doing it with or without those guys. It's just not going to be as easy for him. As far as Stroud, this is the matchup that's intriguing to me. When it comes to Stroud versus the Bengals, don't look too much at the Bengals defense overall pass yardage allowed. That doesn't tell the whole story. This is a defense that, because they thrive on disguise, because they thrive on deception, I think sometimes it takes a little while for teams like that to get into the groove. And this defense looks a lot more like you expect out of Lou Anarumo. And the big thing is turnovers. They've got the second most interceptions in the league, going up against CJ Stroud, who has the lowest interception rate in the league by far. By far. His interception rate is 3 times lower than Lamar Jackson. He's thrown 1 interception all year. Yes, he's gotten lucky a couple times, but we're far enough in the season now that, all quarterbacks have gotten lucky a few times on interception-worthy throws. And even if CJ had been really unlucky on a lot of those interception-worthy throws, he still would have thrown very few interceptions. So the question is, all right, how aggressively are the Texans going to continue to push the ball downfield? If you're a Bengals fan watching this is what you need to know. CJ Stroud has the 3rd highest yards per attempt in the league. It's right around 8 yards per attempt right now, while throwing very, very few interceptions. Like, if you look at his completion percentage or anything in the negative stats that people are trying to throw out there, there's a story behind all of that. He's been very careful with the ball while still pushing the ball downfield. Not going to have Nico Collins this week, which is a big deal because Nico is just really turned into a hoss. As far as that lowest interception rate in the league, though, the Bengals have the second highest number of interceptions, and they're creating the most turnovers on a per drive basis. Exactly where they're up there. All right, the Bengals are forcing a lot of turnovers, including you look at last week. All right, the Bills, Dalton Kincaid made a really nice catch over the middle in the 4th quarter. It was on a drive that would have put the Bills almost assuredly within 1 score, and their Dalton Kincaid fumbled the ball, right over the middle, and ended up being the game. That really ended up being the game for the Bills, where they could have been pushing and been in contention in that game. Texans had Dalton Schultz cough one up very early in the game last week. So Dalton Schultz has 10 receptions for 130 yards last week, but very early on hurt the team. That's really where I worry more. I don't worry about the interceptions as much as I worry about how opportunistic this Bengals defense has been. They're coming up and they're doing a lot of the things that you hope the Texans defense will start doing, because they played in such a style and in such a way that it should create a lot of opportunities for big hits and forced turnovers. So right now, the Texans have a good turnover margin, more based on CJ being careful with the ball than anything else. As far as CJ's scouting report, some of the negatives they brought up about CJ, one was just, okay, how well is he going to be able to improvise? Remember? I'm sure you remember, it was less than a year ago. CJ was the latest quarterback to be penalized for being on a good offense in college. So because he didn't have to improvise as much as Bryce Young, I don't even fault scouts for saying it, because part of it is just, okay, he didn't get as many opportunities to see CJ do what he's capable of doing until that Georgia game. He would do it at times, but he just relied on it really heavily in that Georgia game. whatever he was doing in that Georgia game, like he's continued that completely. You got to understand, this is an offensive line that was playing 4 backups initially, still has guys playing out of position, still has a center who's the 4th center that CJ has taken snaps from this year. That's 4th. He's not even 4th string because I don't think Dieter was Dieter on the squad for the first part of training camp. So like that's what he's been dealing with, and he's had to run around and scramble a little bit. Last week, he may have been the team's best running back when he caught an impromptu option pitch from Devin Singletary. It was completely just made up on the fly. He ended up running 10 yards and getting a first down for it. That's what we've been seeing out of CJ Stroud the entire year. So yeah, his ability to improvise is dead on. People were worried about how he was under pressure. This is the thing I would say about that, because you can look up some pressure stats that show that CJ struggled versus pressure. I don't think they're truly indicative of how he's played, because what CJ has done really well is get rid of the ball. Like he has zero ego about him when it comes to throwing an incompletion. And like, this might sound like rose-colored glasses, total homer saying this. No, look, I played with David Carr when he was a rookie, or I played on the same team as David Carr when he was a rookie. David was terrified of throwing incompletions. He took so many sacks because he didn't want to throw an incompletion. And it was a real issue. You know, it's hard to build trust with your offensive line when they're getting blamed for setting a record in sacks allowed. CJ got sacked a bunch, 13 times in the first 2 games. And then like that, it was like turned it off like a spigot. Just stopped getting sacked because he's throwing the ball away. When it comes to that interception rate, he's been very, very good at, like, on hooks and curls especially. He'll throw it at dudes' feet so that either it's going to be a first down or it's going to be an incompletion, but it's not going to be an interception. He'll throw it out of bounds, or he'll throw it like just out of reach of the defenders, so it's either out of bounds or to the receiver. Like, all that stuff, it's really good. And that's where, if you look at one of the other criticisms people have of him, is right now it's his low completion percentage. It's 62%. So it's not like Josh Allen in his first couple of years or anything. But that goes hand in hand with that. Early on, actually, really, it was after the first couple of games. It was ironic. He really learned about how to handle that offensive line. As they started getting healthy, he was throwing the ball away real quickly too. Like, the accuracy has been his calling card. The whole ball placement specialist stuff, that has been his calling card. It's been nothing. Like, I had somebody in the comments a little while back bring up that completion percentage. At the time, he was like 58%, and say like, well, how come you don't talk about his horrible accuracy issues? And I'm like, if you've watched any of CJ Stroud's games, including versus the Saints when he completed less than 50%, like, accuracy is the calling card. Accuracy is the good thing. The injuries, I had to take 2 screenshots of the Texans injury report. Did not participate. Andrew Beck is out. Tight end / fullback / whatever. He is another. I'm going to call him a tight end in this regard, because if you think about the key moment in the game last week for the Bengals was when Dalton Kincaid, the tight end, fumbled what would have been a first down in the red zone for the Bills in the fourth quarter. Could have brought him within 1 score. Andrew Beck had a fumble a couple weeks ago, and then Dalton Schultz had a fumble last week. Like, the tight end / fullback position for the Texans cannot be doing that. Nico Collins out. A lot of Bengals fans might not realize or understand how big a deal that is. Nico has been a machine. Kaimi Fairbairn, the Texans they did sign, well, they'll probably elevate Amendola from the practice squad, but we of course also have various numbers of running backs that could do the job too. Brevin Jordan's been out for a while. Steven Nelson is questionable. Now, this is big because Derek Stingley is back and practicing in full. We'll talk about Derek Stingley a little bit later. But the difference between having 0 Steven Nelson and 0 Derek Stingley is going to be a huge one. And that's not to say that, like, Steven Nelson is all pro this year or anything, but he's been very stable. Like, you haven't seen him make a lot of plays or be targeted a lot, really, just because there's so many easy options elsewhere. I don't think it's that Steven Nelson is playing incredible football. It's that there's other guys that are open all the time. And if you got Derek Stingley back, at least it could allay some of that. Remember, Derek Stingley's had a whole lot of reps against Jamar Chase back in college. Not that doesn't mean he's going to be a shutdown versus Jamar Chase, but it's one little extra advantage. Dameon Pierce out. The rushing attack has not been our calling card. Henry To'oTo'o out, and Jimmy Ward is the other one that in the secondary, we have yet to now with Jimmy Ward officially out, the Texans have yet to have all four of the starting defensive backs together for one game. Full participation. Robert Woods with his foot. That's the one big thing. So if you look down at the bottom here, Derek Stingley and Robert Woods are the two that really stick out in my mind. Tunsil's had his knee all year long, but Derek Stingley just talked about. I think it can allow the Texans to start playing more aggressively, not have to play as much bend but don't break, don't have to play as many soft shells. And then Robert Woods, this is the new Sonoma background, by the way. This is why I was late today because I downloaded Sonoma. I'm usually pretty bitchy about new updates, but this Sonoma so far, it makes me feel like I've got a bigger computer screen. So Bengals, this is what you need to know. No, I hate you, Sonoma. Okay, there we go. I love you, Sonoma. Okay, Tee Higgins out. Sam Hubbard out. Big because the strength of the Bengals defense in a lot of ways, and I think they're both captains, is Hendrickson and Hubbard on either side. It looked like Hubbard got hurt in the fourth quarter last week, and he was kind of iffy until yesterday when they made him officially out. He hadn't practiced all week, but between those two, those guys are kind of a headache. The big thing too, Cam Taylor-Britt with a quad, full participation but questionable in the game. Cam Taylor-Britt is one of those guys that has been the reason for them turning the ball over as much as they are. I'm so excited about this game. When it comes to the actual run game itself, Michael Dieter, the center, versus DJ Reader is one of the big matchups that I thought Michael Dieter did about as well as you could have expected last week versus Vita Vea, and deserves a lot of credit for holding up in pass protection. A couple of the really bad run plays where Vita Vea made a play was actually the fault of other guys. I mean, they were running, there's either a counter or a pin and pull where, Dieter is just turning to his left and the right guard's supposed to block Vita Vea, and Vita Vea just came through unblocked. Like, if you choose not to block DJ Reader on anything other than a trap or a screen tomorrow, my God, offensive line, I disown all of you. I disown all of you. I'm close already. I've threatened your inheritance multiple times, but I disown all of you. Some people ask whether Reader might be a potential free agent signing for the Texans this next offseason. I would be surprised because he's a little bit more. He falls into that category of he's way more athletic than you think he is, and he's a better pass rusher than you think he is, but he's not quite as sleek an athlete as I think D'Amico likes to have at the defensive tackle position. I wouldn't discount it whatsoever, but you've got this new age. I would put DJ Reader in that same category as Vita Vea. It's like they're still run stuffers. It's just they're playing in this era where they expect more out of a 335 or 340 pounder. So those guys have developed pass rush skills. It's probably like when pickups started having automatic transmissions. There was a period of time, kids, if any of you even know what a manual transmission is, where like no self-respecting pickup driver would have an automatic transition. That's for the ladies. And then over time, you're like, oh, well, okay, I'm not. Maybe being a chauvinistic bastard is it's kind of a pain in the butt. They got better. That's where so DJ Reader is like he's like a Ram 3500 with an automatic transmission. If you look at the Texans' run defense, so on the other side of it, Joe Mixon, like classic. Like he's a machine. His numbers weren't that great last week. He got 19 touches. That's what he gets. He gets 19 touches this big guy's very touchy. So, he's going to get 14 or 15 runs. He's going to get past the ball a few times. And the old test of like whether you're a good rushing offense or a good rushing defense is, can you run the ball when you need to run the ball? Can you stop the run when you need to stop the run? And that's where the numbers are a little bit deceptive for both these teams. Joe Mixon at the end of that game, when the Bengals needed a first down to close the game out, Joe Mixon shook Von Miller and ran around the end for a first down. Game effectively over. Texans defense, sure, they're top 5 in a lot of regards against the run, but in the fourth quarter of a lot of these games this year, the defense is broken down. Like they made a lot of improvements in a lot of ways, and I love the improvement they made, and I love the fact that last year they were historically one of the worst run defenses historically in a lot of ways. But like they've flipped that around completely. It's just they can't quite stop the run when they need to stop the run. That's what I'd like to see them do this week. Hey, if you made it all the way this far, just know I forgot to record a conclusion to this during my live stream. But if you made it this far, you should probably subscribe, and I appreciate it if you do. Like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff.